In the winter of 1987, the quiet mountain community of Stowe, Vermont was unsettled by the discovery of a locked storage room deep beneath the Alpine Vista Lodge. Steve Garrison had been working maintenance at the lodge for 3 years, but he had never seen this particular door. But when a burst pipe forced him into the basement's forgotten corners, he uncovered a truth so chilling it would unravel the very fabric of his understanding of the place he called home, and lead to the most horrifying revelation imaginable. The metal door sat wedged between two concrete support beams, painted the same institutional green as the basement walls. Steve almost missed it entirely. Water from the broken pipe had pooled against the base, and as he knelt with his flashlight and wrench, the beam caught the dull gleam of a padlock that had been hidden in shadow for years. The lock was old, its brass surface tarnished black. Steve tested it with his fingers. Solid, unmovable. But the doorframe around it had warped with moisture and time. 3 sharp blows with his hammer, and the entire latch assembly pulled free from rotting wood. The door swung inward on screaming hinges. Steve's flashlight beam swept across a scene that made his breath catch in his throat. 2 leather suitcases sat side by side against the far wall, their surfaces covered in a fine layer of dust. Between them, a small velvet jewelry box lay open, revealing the empty indentations where rings had once rested. But the rings themselves lay scattered on the concrete floor. Nearby, a simple gold band and a diamond engagement ring that caught his flashlight beam like tiny stars. The air in the room carried the musty scent of old fabric and something else Steve couldn't identify. Something that made his skin crawl. On a wooden shelf above the suitcases, a manila envelope had been carefully placed, its contents visible through a tear in the corner. Photographs. Black and white photographs of people Steve didn't recognize. But he recognized the suitcases. He had seen them before 4 years ago, when the search teams had combed every inch of the lodge looking for David and Karen Morrison. The newlyweds who had simply vanished from their room on the last night of their honeymoon. Steve's hand trembled as he reached for his radio. The state police arrived within an hour. Detective Sarah Chen had worked missing persons cases for 15 years, but something about the Morrison disappearance had always bothered her. Now standing in the cramped storage room, with Steve's flashlight casting harsh shadows on the walls, she finally understood why. The photographs told a story she wished she didn't have to read. Image after image showed David and Karen Morrison during their final day at the lodge, eating breakfast in the dining room, walking hand in hand through the snow-covered courtyard, laughing together on the ski lift. But there was something wrong with the angles. The shots were taken from a distance, through windows, from hidden vantage points. Someone had been watching them, documenting their every move. February 14th, 1983, Chen said, reading the date stamp on the back of one photo. Valentine's Day, the night they disappeared. Steve stood in the doorway, unwilling to enter the room fully. The musty air seemed to press against his lungs. I remember the search. We looked everywhere. Every room, every closet, every storage area. Except this one, Chen replied, her voice flat. She lifted one of the suitcases onto the shelf. The clasps opened with sharp clicks. Inside Karen's clothes were neatly folded sweaters, jeans, the red silk nightgown her sister had mentioned during the original investigation. Everything exactly as it should be, except for the fact that it was here, instead of wherever Karen Morrison had gone. The jewelry box held more than empty ring impressions. Beneath the satin lining, Chen found a folded piece of paper. Lodge letterhead, a typed list of guest room numbers and checkout times. Room 237. The Morrison suite was circled in red ink with a handwritten note in the margin. Final sweep, 11:30 p.m. Chen's radio crackled. "Detective, we've pulled the 1983 investigation files. 3 suspects were questioned but never charged. Rick Delacroix, the lodge manager, Paul Hendricks, a guest in room 201, and Lisa Hartwell, front desk clerk." The photographs scattered across the shelf showed the couple's final hours in excruciating detail. In every image, David and Karen looked happy, completely unaware that someone was watching, someone who had access to lodge letterhead and knowledge of their schedule, someone who had been planning this moment very carefully. Rick Delacroix had aged 20 years in the 4 since the Morrison disappearance. Detective Chen found him in his cramped office above the lodge's main lobby, hunched over a desk, covered in unpaid invoices and bank notices. The man who had once managed one of Vermont's premier ski destinations now looked like he was managing his own funeral arrangements. "I told the police everything back then," Rick said without looking up from his paperwork. His voice carried the hollow tone of someone who had repeated the same words too many times. The Morrisons checked out that morning, paid their bill, left in their rental car. Chen placed one of the photographs on his desk. David and Karen walking through the lobby, their suitcases in hand. Except their suitcases never left the building. Rick's hand stopped moving across the invoice in front of him. For a long moment, the only sound was the heating system clicking on overhead. When he finally looked up, Chen saw something she hadn't expected relief. "I've been waiting 4 years for someone to find that room," he said. The financial records painted a picture of desperation that made Chen's chest tighten. In early 1983, the Alpine Vista Lodge was hemorrhaging money. A warm winter had killed the ski season. Major repairs were needed on the heating system. Rick had been borrowing against the lodge's insurance policy, taking cash advances against fictional damage claims. By February, he was 3 months behind on the mortgage. The Morrisons had a $50,000 life insurance policy, Chen said, reading from the file. Added Karen to David's employer plan right after the wedding. You had access to their personal information through the guest registration. Rick's laugh was bitter. "You think I killed them for insurance money, detective? I couldn't even afford to have the locks changed on the guest room doors. Half the staff was working for promises instead of paychecks." Gong! Through the office window, Chen could see a figure in coveralls moving across the courtyard below. The ski lifts hung motionless against the grey sky, their cables singing in the wind. A maintenance worker was checking the lift mechanisms, moving with the methodical precision of someone who had performed the same routine for years. "Who else had access to the basement?" Chen asked. "Besides me, Tom Brennan runs the night maintenance. Been here since we opened." Paul Hendricks had checked into room 201 on February 10, 1983, 3 days before David and Karen Morrison arrived. According to the lodge records, he was a software consultant from Boston taking a solo ski vacation. According to the staff who remembered him, he never touched his skis after the first day. Detective Chen sat across from Margaret Foster, who had worked the lodge's restaurant in 1983. Margaret's hands shook slightly as she turned the photographs face down on the table between them. She had recognized Paul immediately. The thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, who always sat alone at table 6, positioned to watch the main dining room entrance. "He made everyone uncomfortable," Margaret said. "Not just the staff. Other guests complained. He would follow that young couple everywhere, the girl especially, Karen. He had this way of watching her that made my skin crawl." The photographs told the story Margaret couldn't. Shot after shot of Karen Morrison bending to adjust her ski boots, laughing at something David said, brushing snow from her hair. The camera had captured her from every angle, at every moment, with the obsessive detail of someone who had nothing else to do but watch. "Did he ever approach them directly?" Chen asked. "Once. Valentine's Day morning. I was refilling the coffee station when I heard raised voices. David Morrison was telling Paul to stay away from his wife." Paul just stood there smiling. Said something about how beautiful couples don't last long in places like this. Margaret paused, her fingers tracing the edge of one photograph. That afternoon I saw Paul talking to Tom at the ski lift station, pointing toward the couple. Chen made a note in her pad. Tom Brennan's name kept surfacing in unexpected places. What were they discussing? I couldn't hear, but Tom was nodding like he understood something. Paul handed him something looked like money, and then Tom wrote something down on a piece of paper. The maintenance shed behind the lodge still contained Paul's abandoned camera equipment. Chen found it exactly where the original investigation had left it: 3 professional-grade cameras, telephoto lenses, and boxes of developed film. Most of the photographs were innocuous vacation shots. But buried in the bottom of one box, Chen discovered images that made her stomach turn. Close-ups of the Morrisons' hotel room window, pictures taken through gaps in the restaurant blinds, and one photograph that stopped her cold Karen Morrison in her nightgown, clearly unaware she was being watched. Lisa Hartwell had been David Morrison's girlfriend for 2 years before Karen entered the picture. In 1983, she was 24 years old, working the front desk at Alpine Vista Lodge to pay for nursing school and watching the man she loved celebrate his honeymoon with another woman. Detective Chen found Lisa's employment file in Rick Delacroix's office. The photograph clipped to the inside cover showed a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair and eyes that held too much intensity for someone her age. But it was the incident reports stapled behind the photo that made Chen's pulse quicken. February 13th, 1983. Guest complaint filed by David Morrison. Front desk clerk Lisa Hartwell made inappropriate personal comments during check-in process. February 14th, 1983. Verbal altercation in lobby between Hartwell and guests in room 237. Lodge manager Rick Delacroix witnessed the incident. Chen found Rick in the lodge's wine cellar, taking inventory with mechanical precision. The basement felt different now that she knew about the hidden storage room. Every shadow seemed to conceal another secret. Lisa lost control that night, Rick said without looking up from his clipboard. She cornered them right there in the main lobby, told Karen she was marrying a man who didn't know how to commit to anyone. Said Karen would find out soon enough what kind of person David really was. The lodge's guest registry for February 14th showed Lisa had worked the evening shift manning the front desk until midnight. Her access card records showed she had used her key to enter multiple areas of the building that night: the laundry room, the maintenance corridors, and the basement storage area where the boiler was located. She knew David better than anyone, Chen said. His habits, his schedule, where he liked to go in the evenings. That's what worried me, Rick replied. But Tom was the one who found her crying in the utility room that night, around 11:30. Said she was talking about how some people didn't deserve to be happy. Rick paused, his hand hovering over a dusty wine bottle. Tom was good to the staff that way, always willing to listen when someone was having a hard time. Chen made another note. Tom Brennan, present at every crucial moment, but always in the background. Always helpful, always ready to lend a sympathetic ear to troubled employees who might say things they would later regret. The crime scene investigators worked through the storage room with methodical precision, cataloguing every piece of evidence with the kind of attention that comes 4 years too late. Detective Chen watched from the doorway as they photographed the suitcases, the jewelry, the scattered photographs. But it was the smaller items that began to tell the real story. Tucked beneath Karen Morrison's silk blouse, investigators found a crumpled ski lift ticket. The small rectangular piece of paper was barely larger than a postage stamp, its edges torn from being folded and unfolded. The date stamp read February 14th, 1983, 11:47 p.m. The night shift operator's initials were scrawled in the corner. TB. Night skiing ended at 10. Chen noted, turning the ticket over in her gloved hands. Why would someone validate a lift ticket almost 2 hours later? The lead investigator, a methodical man named Patterson, was more interested in the photographs spread across the shelf. He had arranged them in chronological order, creating a timeline of the Morrisons' final day. The early images showed the couple eating breakfast, their faces bright, with the kind of happiness that makes other people envious. The later photographs grew more disturbing. "Look at the angles," Patterson said, pointing to a series of shots taken through the lodge's main window. The photographer was outside in the snow. These were taken after dark, probably around 9 or 10 p.m. You can see the reflection of interior lights on the glass. In the final photograph, David and Karen were walking toward the elevator, their hands intertwined. But there was something else in the frame, a shadow in the background barely visible near the front desk. Someone watching them. Someone who had been careful to stay out of the direct light. Chen lifted one of the photographs closer to her face. In the corner of the image, partially obscured by the elevator doors, she could see a figure in work clothes. The maintenance uniform was clearly visible, along with the name tag every Alpine Vista employee was required to wear. But the angle was wrong to read the name clearly. "The person taking these pictures knew their routine," Patterson continued, "knew where they would be and when. This level of surveillance takes planning and access." The ski lift ticket felt insignificant in Chen's hand, just another piece of debris from a night that had ended in tragedy. But something about it bothered her. The timestamp, the initials, the fact that someone had thought to save it among all the other evidence in this room. Tom Brennan had been operating the Alpine Vista Lodge's ski lifts for 8 years when Detective Chen found him in the equipment shed, methodically cleaning the cable mechanisms with the patience of someone who understood that small details prevented larger disasters. He was a compact man in his early 30s with the kind of weathered face that comes from working outdoors in mountain winters. When Chen introduced herself, he set down his tools and gave her his complete attention. "Terrible thing about that couple." Tom said, his voice quiet and measured. "I remember that night well. Not often you have guests disappear like that." Chen showed him the ski lift ticket found in the storage room. Tom examined it carefully, turning it over in his calloused hands. His initials were clear in the corner, TB stamped in the same blue ink he used for his end-of-shift reports. "This was from the final safety check," Tom explained. "Every night at closing, I run the lifts once more to make sure everything's working properly. Sometimes guests leave things behind, gloves, ski passes, that sort of thing. I document everything and turn it into lost and found. But this ticket is time-stamped at 11:47 p.m., Chen pointed out. "Your shift ended at midnight." Tom nodded. "Rick kept us on late shifts that winter. Money was tight, so he reduced the day crew and had night maintenance handle more of the routine work. I was checking the main lift when I heard voices near the lodge. Sounded like an argument." Chen's pen hovered over her notepad. "Did you see who was arguing?" "Not clearly. The lights in the courtyard weren't great back then. But I saw 2 figures near the service entrance, the one that leads to the basement. One was definitely wearing a lodge uniform. The other looked like a guest. Male, I think, based on the build." Tom paused, his eyes distant with the effort of remembering. "The strange thing was, I saw that guest earlier that evening talking to Lisa at the front desk. Seemed pretty upset about something." The service entrance Tom mentioned was directly above the storage room where the evidence had been found. Chen made a note to check if the basement access had been secured in 1983. "Did you report what you saw?" "I mentioned it to the police when they interviewed everyone, but they seemed more interested in the guests who'd been bothering the couple. That Paul fellow with the camera and Rick's financial troubles." Tom picked up his cleaning cloth again, his movements precise and economical. "Always seemed to me like someone with inside knowledge had to be involved. Someone who knew their schedule, knew when they'd be alone." The alibis that had seemed solid in 1983 began to crumble under Detective Chen's renewed scrutiny. Rick Delacroix claimed he had been in his office until 2 a.m. working on financial projections to save the lodge. But the computer logs Chen obtained from the State Police evidence room showed no activity on his office terminal after 9:15 p.m. Lisa Hartwell insisted she had remained at the front desk until her midnight shift ended, but the guest sign-in sheets were mysteriously blank after 10:30 p.m. Paul Hendricks maintained he had been in his room developing photographs, yet the chemical smell that should have lingered in room 201 was never mentioned in any of the original police reports. Chen spread the inconsistencies across her hotel room bed like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Each suspect had motive opportunity and a story that didn't quite hold water. But something else bothered her, something Tom Brennan had mentioned during their interview about seeing someone in a lodge uniform near the service entrance. The employee work schedules for February 14, 1983, told an interesting story. Lisa Hartwell's shift officially ended at midnight, but she had no time cards for that evening. Rick Delacroix was scheduled to work until 2 a.m., but the maintenance logs showed the office heating system was turned off at 9:30 p.m. Something that would only happen if the space was unoccupied. Paul Hendricks wasn't an employee, but several witnesses had seen him talking to staff members throughout the day. Chen returned to Tom the next morning, finding him adjusting the tension on the main lift cable. The morning light made his movements look almost choreographed, each motion economical and practiced. She watched him work for several minutes before speaking. "I've been reviewing everyone's statements from that night," she said. "You mentioned seeing someone in a lodge uniform near the service entrance. Can you remember anything else about them?" Tom paused in his work, his hands still gripping the cable tensioner. "Been thinking about that myself. The person was moving carefully like they were trying not to be seen. But they knew where they were going. No hesitation, no fumbling with keys or trying to find the right door. So, definitely an employee. Had to be. That entrance was always locked. Only staff had access cards." Tom resumed his work, but Chen noticed his movements had become more deliberate. "Makes you wonder who else might have been down there that night. Someone the missing couple trusted enough to follow." Steve Garrison couldn't stop thinking about the ski lift ticket. 3 days had passed since he discovered the storage room, and while Detective Chen focused on the obvious suspects, something nagged at Steve's practical mind. He had been working maintenance long enough to understand the rhythm of the lodge's operations, the invisible systems that kept everything running smoothly. The ticket bothered him because it represented a deviation from routine. Ski lift operators didn't validate tickets after hours unless something unusual was happening. Steve found himself in the lodge's administrative office scrolling through employee access logs from 1983 that had been stored in dusty filing cabinets. The Alpine Vista Lodge used a simple card key system in 1983. Each employee's access was logged automatically whenever they used their card to enter restricted areas. Steve cross-referenced the timestamps with the work schedules looking for discrepancies. What he found made his stomach clench. On February 14, 1983, only 3 employees had accessed the basement level. After 10 p.m., Rick Delacroix. At 10:15 p.m., Lisa Hartwell at 10:45 p.m., and Tom Brennan at 11:30 p.m. But according to the statements from the original investigation, Rick claimed he never left his office that night, and Lisa insisted she remained at the front desk. Tom's access made sense. His shift included final equipment checks and securing the building for the night. But the timestamp was interesting, 11:30 p.m. 17 minutes before the ski lift ticket was validated. Steve walked to the basement, retracing the path from the service entrance to the hidden storage room. The distance was less than 50 feet. Someone familiar with the building's layout could make the trip in under 2 minutes. someone who knew which corridors were monitored by security cameras and which were blind spots. The employee files revealed more troubling details. Tom Brennan's personnel record showed exemplary performance reviews, perfect attendance, and absolutely no disciplinary actions. But tucked behind his emergency contact form, Steve found something that made his hands tremble, a small notebook filled with Tom's handwriting. The entries were brief clinical observations about lodge guests. Room 215 couple argues about money. Marriage won't last. Room 108 husband ignores wife at dinner. She deserves better. Room 301 newlyweds. Too happy. Makes other guests uncomfortable. The final entry was dated February 14, 1983. Room 237 perfect couple. Everyone watching them. Someone should teach them that happiness doesn't last forever. Steve found Tom's employee locker in the maintenance building's basement, tucked between cleaning supplies and spare parts for the ski lift machinery. The combination lock was old, its numbers worn smooth by years of use. Steve's hands shook as he tried different combinations. Tom's hire date, his social security number, finally his birthday from the personnel file. The lock clicked open on 02/14 February 14th. Inside, wedged behind a spare work uniform, Steve discovered a manila folder that made his breath catch in his throat. The contents painted a picture of a man whose quiet exterior concealed something far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The first document was a rejection letter from a dating service in Burlington dated 1981. We regret that we cannot provide our services to you at this time. Your application responses indicate attitudes toward women that are incompatible with healthy relationship formation. A paperclip to the letter was Tom's original application, filled with his careful handwriting. In the section asking about ideal relationship dynamics, Tom had written, "Women need to understand that happiness is temporary. Someone has to teach them that lesson." More letters followed. Rejection after rejection. A woman from Stowe who had met Tom at a church social wrote, "Please do not contact me again. Your comments about couples being disgusting displays of false affection made me extremely uncomfortable." Another from a co-worker at a previous job, "I don't appreciate your suggestions that my marriage will end badly. That kind of negativity isn't welcome." But it was the newspaper clippings that made Steve's stomach turn. Article after article about missing couples, mysterious disappearances, unsolved cases from across Vermont and New Hampshire. Each one carefully cut out and stored in chronological order. In the margins, Tom had made notes in his precise handwriting, "Probably deserved it. Too happy to be real." Someone finally showed them the truth. The final item in the folder was a photograph Steve recognized David and Karen Morrison walking through the lodge lobby on their wedding day radiant with new love. But this wasn't one of the surveillance photos found in the storage room. This image was different. It was taken from behind the front desk at close range, while the couple was checking in. Tom had been there that day, probably delivering maintenance supplies to the front desk, and he had seen them at their happiest moment. On the back of the photograph in Tom's careful script, February 10th, 1983. They won't be smiling much longer. Steve confronted Tom at the main ski lift station, where the quiet maintenance worker was performing his evening safety checks with the same methodical precision he had shown for 8 years. The manila folder felt heavy in Steve's hands as he approached. Tom looked up from the cable mechanism, his face showing no surprise at seeing Steve there after hours. "You found my locker," Tom said simply. It wasn't a question. Steve held up the photograph of David and Karen Morrison. "You were planning this from the moment they checked in." Tom set down his tools and walked to the edge of the platform, looking out over the darkened ski slopes. They were so perfect, so happy. It made people sick to watch them. Even the staff complained about how they acted like they were the only two people in the world. "So you decided to teach them a lesson." "I decided to show them the truth." Tom's voice remained calm, almost conversational. Love doesn't last. Happy couples are just an illusion that makes everyone else feel inadequate. Someone has to demonstrate reality. The confession came in Tom's characteristic measured tone, as if he were describing routine maintenance procedures. He had used his access card to unlock the storage room days before the Morrisons' arrival, preparing the space. On February the 14th, he had waited until Lisa's argument with the couple created the perfect cover. While the lodge staff was distracted by the confrontation, Tom had approached David and Karen in the basement laundry area, claiming there was a problem with their room's heating system. "They followed me willingly," Tom said, "trusted me completely. I was just the helpful maintenance worker who wanted to fix their problem." He had led them to the storage room, claiming he needed to show them something about the building's infrastructure. Once inside, he had stepped out and engaged the lock trapping them in the windowless space. "The blizzard was perfect," Tom continued, his eyes still fixed on the distant mountains. "No one could hear them calling for help. The room wasn't heated. I went back several times that night to listen, to watch through the crack under the door. They spent hours trying to break out, calling for help, holding each other." Tom turned to face Steve, and for the first time, there was emotion in his expression, satisfaction. By morning, they understood. Perfect love is just another fairy tale. Reality is cold and lonely and final. Detective Chen arrived within minutes of Steve's radio call, her patrol car's lights cutting through the mountain darkness. Tom Brennan offered no resistance as she placed the handcuffs around his wrists, his face maintaining the same calm expression he had worn while confessing to murder. As they walked him toward the patrol car, he turned back to look at the lodge one final time. "You still don't understand," Tom said to Steve. "I was doing everyone a favor, showing them what real love looks like when it's tested." The media attention that followed was mercifully brief. The Morrison families who had endured 4 years of uncertainty finally had their answers. David and Karen were found exactly where Tom said they would be, in a shallow grave behind the maintenance building, their bodies preserved by the mountain cold. They had been buried with the same methodical care Tom brought to all his work. Rick Delacroix sold the Alpine Vista Lodge 6 months later, unable to continue operating a business where such horror had unfolded. Lisa Hartwell finished nursing school and moved to California, saying she needed distance from the memories. Paul Hendricks was never heard from again, his obsessive photographs becoming evidence in a case that no longer needed his particular brand of disturbed behaviour. Steve remained at the lodge through the transition to new ownership, helping to train the replacement maintenance staff. But he found himself checking locks more carefully now, paying attention to the quiet employees who seemed too eager to help, too willing to listen to other people's problems. As they walked through the empty lodge for the final time, Steve looked at the basement door one last time. The real journey was just beginning, learning to trust again, to believe that not everyone who smiled and helped and seemed harmless was hiding something monstrous. In the end, that was the lesson: evil might hide behind familiar faces, but genuine kindness still existed in the world. As they moved toward his new position at a lodge in New Hampshire, Steve squeezed his wife's hand. "What if I can't tell the difference anymore between someone who wants to help and someone who wants to hurt?" "We'll figure it out together," Sarah replied softly. "One day at a time." They stepped toward healing, toward a future they would build one careful day at a time.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.